What is science? Webster says science is knowledge derived from observation and study. So is evolution part of science? Depends on what you mean. There are 6 different definitions of evolution.
Creationists proclaim that they are not anti-science, just anti-evolution. But as we can see from the genius that is Eric Hovind, he's grouping different fields of scientific study under one scientific theory which only pertains to biodiversity, not the origin of life, nor the evolution of the stars, time, planets, etc. And he only acknowledges one of which, of course, because he can't deny it, because we've seen it happen, but we've also seen evolution at the species level.
New species will develop because of geological isolation or because of environmental conditions. These sort of selections take place.
So, Mr. Taylor, you acknowledge that we've seen macroevolution, which is at or above the species level. So we've seen both micro and macro. But of course, he doesn't mean that this is microevolution because it's still a lizard. Well, that can be refuted with this statement. Well, no shit. What were you expecting? Of course, what they want is something absurd and ridiculous, not what evolution would actually permit.
What part of evolution is scientific versus what part is really more of a religious worldview? What is just believed by faith rather than actually seen by the scientific method that we use today? Because there's so much confusion over this that the average person really just needs to know the truth. And when you look into it, you find out both creation and evolution are religious worldviews.
Unlike religion, evolution has no dogma. Dogma has no facts behind it. Dogma is based on faith. Evolution has a plethora of evidence.
The problem is, no intermediate fossils have ever been found.
Science has never found a genuine transitional form.
This is wrong, of course, because we have a plethora of transitional fossils, whether it be land mammals to whales, non-avian to avian dinosaurs, the appearance of hominids, and the beginnings of horses. We have these fossils, and we have dozens of them, not just one specimen. We have more than one, sometimes hundreds. The creationists refuse to acknowledge this because, well, they're creationists. Ignorance is their stance.
This is what evolutionists have been searching for hundreds of years. All right? And if you find one of these, you could become rich and famous. So here's some transitional forms. This is called the crocodile. Can you see this?
Molecules to man evolution, what we're actually looking for is a spontaneous increase in genetic information. Do you observe that to happen? The answer is, of course, you do not.
It's often claimed that evolution is simply change over time, and since change over time can be seen everywhere, then evolution is obviously true. But highly qualified creation scientists say there is much more to it than that. For evolution to have turned particles into people, simple change over time is not enough. A special kind of change is needed. That is, naturally occurring change that adds new genetic instructions. No one has seen this special kind of change happen. Darwin's finches, peppered moths and adapting bacteria are all examples of naturally occurring change, but not one of them shows the addition of new genetic instructions.
Nylonase is an enzyme that allows a certain strain of flavobacteria to digest the byproducts of nylon manufacturing. It didn't always have it. It was created by a new gene that increased the complexity of its host and gave the organism new information. This bacteria, in less than a few decades, evolved the ability to digest nylon byproducts, which didn't even exist before. Look at this. This is the exact amino acid sequence of the original digestion gene. There was a gene duplication event that made a copy of this gene, which has no effect except that one copy could mutate freely. No new information was actually created at this point. According to Shannon theory, this is just redundancy, since it's a copy of a gene that exists elsewhere. But the next thing that happened wasn't just any old mutation, it was a frame shift, the most dramatic kind of mutation there is. It affects every single amino acid from the point of the frame shift on. You see, amino acids are formed by every 3 nucleotides, so if you insert a nucleotide, which is what this mutation did, it changes not only the amino acid it inserted itself into, but every single one thereafter. There are 427 amino acids in the original gene. The frame shift took place after the 33rd amino acid, altering over 92% of the gene's information. That's 92% of it gone, finito, kaput. But remember, this is not a loss of information because this gene is a copy. But the frame shift also added a new sequence to the gene, 392 amino acids all total. Just like that. Brand new information telling the bacteria how to digest these nylon byproducts. Not only that, but it made a new start codon at the insertion point, which means that the new sequence the mutation created is an entire gene in and of itself. The first 33 amino acids are no longer part of the gene, so the new gene is 100% brand new.
In nature documentaries and science textbooks, one often hears about creatures that arrived at their body plan very early in evolutionary history and have not made any real changes since that time, supposedly millions of years ago. These are called living fossils, like the coelacanth and the Walmy pine. This phenomenon is known as stasis, things staying pretty much the same. And it turns out that pretty much every animal in the entire fossil record appears suddenly and shows this same history of stasis. This was not predicted by evolution. A more recent and radical theory called punctuated equilibrium recognizes stasis in the fossil record, but requires belief in rapid massive leaps in evolution, an unsubstantiated just so story. However, the physical evidence, sudden appearance and stasis in the fossil record fits remarkably well with the biblical account of a recent creation followed by a devastating global flood, just as the Bible describes in Genesis.
That's just a fancy way of saying magic. Because that's what they're saying. Somehow everything that we know came out of nothing, was willed into existence by some omnipresent, omniscient being. The very definition of magic.
These similarities in structure are then given by the evolutionists as evidence that they must have a common ancestor. Now actually, it's very easy to argue against this because this is actually an illogical method of arguing. It doesn't actually make a great deal of sense. It's a bit like this. This would be a logical argument. Supposing I said that all people with beards were men, Jim has a beard, therefore Jim is a man. That is a logical progression of arguments. However, suppose I said this, all people who have beards are men, Jim is a man, therefore Jim has a beard. That would not be logical. It would be a fallacy known as the affirmation of the consequent, because of course there are many men who do not have beards. Now in the same way, if, and this is a big if the theory of evolution were true, which I don't happen to believe, but if it were true, then it would be the case that you would expect many organisms to have similar structures. That would be logical. But you cannot say that because many organisms have similar structures that the theory of evolution is true, because there could be other explanations why organisms have similar structures. And indeed there is one very obvious one. Just as many models of cars of different types might have certain similarities in appearance if they are made by the same automobile company, in the same way, it is very likely that the similar structures in different organisms are there because they have a common designer.
You know, I get the feeling that this has happened before.
That doesn't mean one came from another. That means that the designer realized there needs to be certain things in common. That's what they say at the factory where they make the motorcycles, the cars, and the trucks. We need to design them with these certain things because they have to operate within these parameters. That's why there's similarity in species. It is really ridiculous reasoning to say because there are similarities between your hand and the hand of a raccoon means that you used to live in a tree.
Shut your face and let me talk to somebody else! You got it?
You all know that evolution argues that we share a common ancestor with the great apes, the chimpanzee, the gorilla, and the orangutan. Well, if that's true, there should be genetic similarities, and in fact there are. But there's something that's really interesting and has the potential, if it were true, to contradict evolutionary common ancestry. And that is, we have 2 fewer chromosomes than the other great apes. We have 46, they all have 48. That's very interesting. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, first of all, the 46 chromosomes that we have, you got 23 from mom and 23 from dad. So it's actually 23 pairs. These guys have 24 from each parent, so they have 24 pairs. So everybody in this room is missing a pair of chromosomes. Now, where did it go? Could it have gotten lost in our lineage? If it got lost, if a whole primate chromosome was lost, that would be lethal. So there's only two possibilities. And that is, if these guys really share a common ancestor, that ancestor either had 48 chromosomes or 46. Now, if it had 48, 24 pairs, which is probably true, because 3 out of 4 have 48 chromosomes, what must have happened is that one pair of chromosomes must have gotten fused. So we should be able to look at our genome and discover that one of our chromosomes resulted from the fusion of 2 primate chromosomes. So we should be able to look around our genome. And you know what? If we don't find it, evolution is wrong. We don't share a common ancestor. So how would we find it? Well, biologists in the room will know that chromosomes have nifty little markers. They have markers called centromeres, which are DNA sequences that are used to separate them during mitosis, and they have cool little DNA sequences on the end called telomeres. What would happen if a pair of chromosomes got fused? Well, what would happen is the fusion would put telomeres where they don't belong, in the center of the chromosome, and the resulting fused chromosome should actually have 2 centromeres. One of them might become inactivated, but nonetheless it should still be there. So we can scan our genome, and you know what? If we don't find that chromosome, evolution's in trouble. Well, guess what? It's chromosome number 2. Our chromosome number 2 was formed by the fusion of 2 primate chromosomes. This is the paper from Nature a little more than a year ago. And I put up a little of the paper. I'm sorry it's technical, but look at what it says. Chromosome 2 is unique to our lineage. It emerged as a result of the head-to-head fusion of 2 chromosomes that remain separate in other primates. Those of you who have not kept up with how much we know about the genome should pay attention to this, because you'll be amazed at how precisely we can look at things. The precise fusion site has been located at base number 114,455,823 to 114,455,838. In other words, within 15 bases. And you'll notice multiple subtelomeric duplications, the telomeres that don't belong, and lo and behold, the centromere that is inactivated corresponds to chimp chromosome 13. It's there, it's testable, it confirms the prediction of evolution. How would intelligent design explain this? Only one way, by shrugging and saying, that's the way the designer made it.
Because the Bible tells us that God made distinct kinds of animals and plants to reproduce after their own kind, great variation within a kind. You see that in natural selection, which is not evolution, by the way.
So apparently, according to creationists, natural selection has nothing to do with evolution, even though it does. Always has, always will. But let's hear from the creationists what their definition of evolution is.
One kind of animal crossing over into another kind.
What a bunch of idiots! What the hell is wrong with them? Have they lost their minds?
Of course, this isn't true. You can never outgrow your ancestry. If you descend from X, then you equal X. Since humans descend from apes and birds descend from dinosaurs, that means that birds are dinosaurs and that humans are apes. If X descends from Y, then X equals Y. So, what do creationists have to refute that?
Fossils tell us 2 important things. One, they tell us that God judged the world. God sent a worldwide flood because the fossils, the overwhelming majority of fossils, were formed during a worldwide flood. So God kept his word about judgment, and he will keep his word about judgment to come at the end of the world.
Go back to an already refuted point, and then add an appeal from authority. Sir, you failed this test. What do you have to say for yourself?
Now agree! Speak up!
What do these stones mean? They mean that God judges sin, and God forgives sin through the work of his Son, Jesus Christ.
Appeal more from authority, apparently.
The lack of evidence is on the side of the evolutionists. They have the burden of proof.
Really? So, where's your evidence for miraculous creation? Where's the evidence for your God? Where's the evidence for multicellular organisms spontaneously coming out of fucking thin air? Where is the evidence for magic? The answer is, there is none. And until you creationists can prove magic, evolution will always be a fact.
What is science? Webster says science is knowledge derived from observation and study. So is evolution part of science? Depends on what you mean. There are 6 different definitions of evolution.
Creationists proclaim that they are not anti-science, just anti-evolution. But as we can see from the genius that is Eric Hovind, he's grouping different fields of scientific study under one scientific theory which only pertains to biodiversity, not the origin of life, nor the evolution of the stars, time, planets, etc. And he only acknowledges one of which, of course, because he can't deny it, because we've seen it happen, but we've also seen evolution at the species level.
New species will develop because of geological isolation or because of environmental conditions. These sort of selections take place.
So, Mr. Taylor, you acknowledge that we've seen macroevolution, which is at or above the species level. So we've seen both micro and macro. But of course, he doesn't mean that this is microevolution because it's still a lizard. Well, that can be refuted with this statement. Well, no shit. What were you expecting? Of course, what they want is something absurd and ridiculous, not what evolution would actually permit.
What part of evolution is scientific versus what part is really more of a religious worldview? What is just believed by faith rather than actually seen by the scientific method that we use today? Because there's so much confusion over this that the average person really just needs to know the truth. And when you look into it, you find out both creation and evolution are religious worldviews.
Unlike religion, evolution has no dogma. Dogma has no facts behind it. Dogma is based on faith. Evolution has a plethora of evidence.
The problem is, no intermediate fossils have ever been found.
Science has never found a genuine transitional form.
This is wrong, of course, because we have a plethora of transitional fossils, whether it be land mammals to whales, non-avian to avian dinosaurs, the appearance of hominids, and the beginnings of horses. We have these fossils, and we have dozens of them, not just one specimen. We have more than one, sometimes hundreds. The creationists refuse